Welcome, friends, to this special commemorative meeting in honor of the founding of the United Lodge of Theosophists. We call it ULT Day. There will be a biographical sketch of the founder, Mr. Crosby, followed by two readings from the writings of Helena P. Blavatsky and William Q. Judge, followed by an overview of the work and influence of Mr. Crosby and a reading from his writings. Mr. Crosby revived the original teachings of the Masters of Wisdom that were passed on by H.E.B. and William Q. Judge. At the time, these writings had lost their purity to spurious alteration and outright abandonment at the hand of so-called successors to H.P.B. Mr. Crosby was a practical worker for humanity, a fighter for a cause, not for a flag. Loyalty to the cause itself is a great sifter, he wrote. He was no believer in diluted theosophy. A humble foot soldier, he had an undeviating devotion to the cause and teacher. He passed no judgments on others, claimed no infallibility for himself, expected no infallibility in others. He had malice toward none, charity for all. He neither assailed himself nor defended others when paths diverged. He never denied his help, gave freely, was ever kind, ever the teacher, ever the guide. He gave theosophy his all, as he knew that theosophy is a life to be lived. Our Mumbai Lodge sent us a short email, which I will read. We send you fraternal greetings and all good wishes on the forthcoming occasion of ULT Day, when we commemorate the passing away of the founder, Mr. Robert Crosby. Remembering his words, we are all links in the great chain of the Theosophical movement. What affects one affects all in a degree. Let us be strong in aspiration, in service, and in our faith and devotion to the teachers and the teachings, and the great ones, remembering Shelley's lines, quote, the desire of the moth for the star, of the night for the morrow, the devotion to something afar from the sphere of our sorrow, confident that they will help at the right appropriate moment and in the right appropriate way. The Bombay Lodge will hold a special meeting to commemorate the occasion on Sunday, June 24, 2018 at 6:15 p.m. their time, which is about now our time, by having a talk on ULT by its associates. Robert Crosby was born January 10, 1849 in Montreal to Scottish parents who had met and married in Canada. His father was with the Hudson Bay Company. His mother lived a life of self-sacrifice, compassion, and service to others. Raised a Presbyterian, R.C. was invited to join communion when he was 16, but he considered himself unfit. The subsequent discussions caused him to doubt the honesty of the church practices. He determined to seek the truth, which must be knowledge, and which was to be found in due course by seeking it. Then followed questioning as to life's object, and his finding that the religions around him offered no satisfactory answers when he questioned them deeply. The psychic powers latent in man were seen by him, but their rationale was not yet understood. He sensed there was a danger in those and also sensed some guidance which helped him avoid unconscious black magic practices. R.C. always had a strong regard for the rights of others and always exercised a strong moral control over himself. He and a partner started a leather manufacturing business in Montreal, and soon after he married the daughter of his partner. The partners later sold their Montreal business and went to Boston, where they established a similar business there. In 1887, R.C.'s business partner brought him news of the prospect of the proposed establishment of a branch of the T.S. in Boston. The word Theosophy suggested much to R.C., so he went to the first meeting. He recognized at once that this was what he was searching for and joined the T.S. immediately. Soon after, Mr. Judge came to Boston to speak, and R.C. was introduced to him. After the meeting, leaving for his hotel, Mr. Judge called back, "Good night, Crosby. I've got you on my list." Mr. Crosby recorded, quote, "A veil was lifted, a tie was formed, which has never since been broken." Mr. Judge frequently came to Boston and stayed at the Crosby House, and Mr. Crosby frequently went to New York to visit with him. On Mr. Judge's suggestion, Mr. Crosby wrote direct to H.P. Blavatsky, and until the departure of these two great teachers, HPB and WQJ, the connection established was unbrokenly maintained. When his esoteric section was formed in October 1888, Mr. Crosby became one of the earliest members. He was first secretary and later president of the esoteric group in Boston. He identified himself with the Zon section of the Theosophical movement of the TS, and was for many years the devoted pupil of HPB and close companion of William P. Judge. Mr. Judge would refer students in the New England states to Mr. Crosby, saying, "Ask Crosby, he thinks and acts as I do." R.C. was elected secretary of the Boston branch and was later put in charge of groups in the 7 New England states. When Mr. Crosby became interested in Theosophy around 1888, his already strained marriage worsened. He sold his business interest and turned the proceeds as well as their house over to his wife, and they divorced. He then started a new leather business on his own. He helped organize the 5th convention of the American section of the Theosophical Society held in Boston in 1892 and the 8th convention in 1895. On page 24 of the report of the 1895 convention, we find Mr. Judge stating, "The basis that fraternal affiliation which should unite all theosophical working bodies and theosophists together. That statement, the unity of the theosophical movement, does not depend upon the singleness of organizations, but upon the similarity of work and aspiration, and in this we will keep the link unbroken." These were HPB's last words. Mr. Crosby participated in submitting a historical sketch of the TS and tracing its major events since 1875. Mr. Crosby witnessed times when Mr. Judge was attacked, exonerated, and later persecuted again by those who did not understand his position, which, like that of HPB, stood for Theosophy, and he used the TS only as a vehicle for its dissemination. To Mr. Judge and Mr. Crosby and others in America and England, the TS was to be directed on the basis of the principles which the Theosophy laid down and no others. Theosophy alone was held to be the sole reason for the TS. Mr. Crosby supported Mr. Judge's principles fully. He acted as one of the witnesses on the scene. He kept the link of pure Theosophy unbroken after Mr. Judge's death. The hints given by Mr. Judge during his life in regard to Mr. Crosby were not grasped by those around him who had what they fancied to be their own positions. Mr. Judge died in March 21, 1896, and in May 1896, Mr. Crosby issued one of the few articles that he signed, a friend of old time and of the future. As such does William Q. Judge appear to me, as doubtless he does to many others in this and other lands. My first meeting with him changed the whole current of my life. I trusted him then as I trust him now, and all those whom he trusted. And to me, it seems that trust is the bond that binds, that makes the strength of the movement, for it is from the heart. The power radiated through Mr. Judge became in each and every present help in the work, he said. He was the voice that encouraged or admonished. Of his extraordinary power of organization, his marvelous insight into the character and capacity of individuals, his ability of turning seeming evils into powers for good, I have had many proofs. That he was a great occultist, many know by individual experience, but none have fathomed the depths of his power and knowledge. The lines have been laid down for us by HPB and WQJ, said Mr. Crosby, and the Masters. And we can take again our watchword, that which he gave us at the passing of HPB. Work, watch, and wait. We will not have long to wait. Mr. Crosby married his second wife in 1900 in Manchester, New Hampshire, and they had a daughter and a son. In 1804, Mr. Crosby was summoned to take up residence in Point Loma outside San Diego, California, where headquarters had been located for the TS in America, now renamed, it was also renamed Universal Brotherhood then. He contributed all his assets to them as they required, and he labored unsuccessfully to keep the Theosophy of the Masters of Wisdom along the original lines as laid down by them through HPB and Mr. Judge. In 1904, Mr. and Mrs. Crosby left Point Loma penniless. Mr. Crosby is reported to have said, "We quietly left Point Loma, and that closed the subject." He later wrote, "I should have known by other means the true state of affairs when Judge passed out of life. I lost touch with him. Doubtless I relied on him too much and had not exercised my own intuition." And from then on he did. He and Mrs. Crosby left, they went to Los Angeles. He got a job with the Los Angeles Times, and he worked in the neighborhood, got to know several people who were interested in Theosophy along the lines he was studying, formed a group there, and went on to form the United Lodge of Theosophists, and we'll stop it there and continue on later. Now we'll have the first reading.
Reading 1 from the writings of H.P. Blavatsky. The recognition of pure Theosophy, the philosophy of the rational explanation of things and natural tenets. is of the most vital importance in the society, inasmuch as it alone can furnish the beacon light needed to guide humanity on its true path. This should never be forgotten, nor should the following fact be overlooked. On the day when Theosophy will have accomplished its most holy and most important mission, namely to unite firmly a body of men of all nations in brotherly love, and bent on a pure altruistic work, not on a labor with selfish motives, on that day only will Theosophy become higher than any nominal brotherhood of men. This will be a wonder and a miracle truly, for the realization of which humanity is vainly waiting for the last 18 centuries, and which every association has hitherto failed to accomplish. Altruism is the keynote of Theosophy and the cure of all ills. This it is which the real founders of the Theosophical Society promote at its first object, universal brotherhood. It is not violence that can ever ensure bread and comfort for all, nor is the kingdom of peace and love, of mutual help and charity and food for all, to be conquered by a cold reasoning diplomatic policy. It is only by the close brotherly union of men's inner selves, of soul solidarity, of the growth and development of that feeling which makes one suffer when one thinks of the suffering of others, that the reign of justice and equality for all can ever be inaugurated.
This is from the writings of William Q. Judge. All of us are brought to this study by our own request made to our higher self, who is Krishna. It does not matter whether he now is consciously aware of having made the request, nor whether it was made as a specific act in this life or in many another precedent one. It was made, and it is to be answered at the right time. Some of us have asked this many times before in ancient births of ours, in other bodies, in other lands. Others are making the request now. But it is more than likely in the case of those who are spurred on to intense effort and longing to know the truth and to strive for unity with God, and that they have put up the petition ages since. We take up the gauge over and over, life after life, and experience after experience, never completely defeated if we always look to Krishna, a higher self. All the passing shows of life, whether fraught with disaster or full of fame and glory, are teachers. He who neglects them neglects the opportunities which seldom the gods repeat. And the only way to learn from them is through the heart's resignation. For when we become in heart completely poor, we at once are the treasurers and dispersers of enormous riches. The attitude to be assumed then is that of doing every act, small and great, trifling and important, because it is before us to do, and as a mere carrying out by us as instruments of the will of that deity who is ourself. This practice is the highest, that which someday we must and will learn to perform. Effacement in the Supreme Spirit is gained by the right-seeing sage whose sins are exhausted, who hath cut asunder all doubts, whose senses and organs are under control, and who is devoted to the well-being of all creatures. If the last qualification is absent, then he is not a right-seeing sage and cannot reach union with the Supreme. It must follow that the humblest imitator, everyone who desires to come to that condition, must try to the best of his ability to imitate the sage who has succeeded. And such is the word of the Master, for he says in many places that if we expect to have his help, we must apply ourselves to the work of helping humanity to the extent of our ability. No more than this is demanded. Krishna says that those who, with the eye of spiritual wisdom, see that the self is whole, begin to reincarnate with that belief ingrained in them. Hitherto, they had come back to earth without that single idea, but possessed of many desires and ideas which separated them from the self. Now they begin to return fully at rest in the self and working out their long accumulated karma. And at last they become what was mentioned in the opening verses, a Mahatma, or great soul.
Mr. Crosby joined the Theosophical movement in 1886-87, and from then on until his death in 1919, he worked continuously without ever turning from the philosophy, the policy, and re-established the movement on the firm foundation following HPB and Mr. Judge's departure. His loyalty to them was absolute. He never said or turned any attention on himself. He was always pointing to the masters, to the teacher and her colleague, and stressed continuously that it was important to study, learn, promulgate the philosophy sent into the world through HPB. His works are tremendous, considering that he had a lot of work to do. The publishing of the books, the original books, fell on Mr. Crosby. He ensured that the future generations would find these books that HPB wrote, and Judges also, in their original form. And he states that to change a single word in those books is a crime against humanity. So today, in the 21st century then, we owe this opportunity to Mr. Crosby, who continued with the original lines laid down in the 20th century and re-established that channel of communication between the Master's Lodge and the world at large. When we look at his works, we see that he wrote a lot of books: Universal Theosophy, Friendly Philosopher, Letters That Have Helped Me. These were all written to the students and others who are seeking guidance from him. He never refused any help to anyone. It was him that made all these philosophical tenets simplified. Not only he was a simple, honest, straightforward man who believed in simple theosophy, but his help to others, when you read his writings, are straightforward also. So in the 21st century, when everything has become very, very complicated, we need to return to the simple style of living. Only do what is necessary, because even during his time, he says the non-essentials had become necessities. In other words, it had been hoisted to the forefront. Now, when he was in Point Loma, as stated before, he found out that the teachings had been subversive, and Tingley had kind of made herself a dictator and changed the philosophy according to her wishes. This caused fracture in the movement. We need to be aware of it. We cannot simply push it under the table and ignore it. Now we have this fracture here in the United States, and then there is another one in Europe. Mrs. Besant and the Theosophical Society undertakes rewriting of the Secret Doctrine, and they change it to kind of support their own stand. They have now moved away from the lines laid down. And we need to be aware of those two movements. This is the Theosophical Society of the 20th century that has veered off the basics. They have veered off from the true philosophy that was sent to the world through the masters. So, where is this philosophy? Well, we have all the writings retained for us in the reprints, which were the exact copies of the ones that were printed during HPB's time. So we have Robert Crosby preserving this link to the second section of the Theosophical movement from the passing of Mr. Judge in 1896, and in 1907, just 11 years later, he made the links once more four square amongst men. In 1909, the third section was restored by the formation of the United Lodge of Theosophists, and in 1912, he founded the magazine Theosophy. All these activities connected with the Theosophical movement, he has been the inspiration and the sustainer from the beginning. So we know that Blavatsky was the mother and the creator of the Theosophical movement. In other words, she was the teacher and the message all in one. Her work exposed her to a lot of abuse, really, if you want to look at it that way, by those who were selfish, both in interests in religion, science, and the Theosophical Society was also imperiled by her mission or overshadowed by her greatness. So she was made as the scapegoat of atonement for the sins of omission and commission of the TS and its fellows. During her lifetime, Mr. Judge was able to work in comparative quiet and seclusion in that part of the great task which was his. But once HPB passed away, then he had to come to the forefront of the movement. Now, HPB always stated that Mr. Judge was the preserver of Theosophy and the heart and soul of the second section. So there is then always a witness on the scene, and after the death of Mr. Judge, Crosby is the one that kept that link unbroken. It was never suspected, even during that period, that this quiet, earnest, steadfast man, whose heart and soul were assimilated to the nature of HPB and William Juan Judge, was to be in fact the agent for the regeneration of the Theosophical movement on the lines laid down by the masters from the beginning. So, when we look at the hints given by both HPB and Mr. Judge, at that time, the students of Theosophy, especially the prominent ones, ought to have known how to look at these signs as realities and find their way through the maze that came about with all these people propelling themselves to the forefront as the successor of HPB. We need to talk a little bit about the successorship here. Successorship. Now, we know that HPB was the agent of the masters. She came on the scene after she had been prepared for many, many years. She had traveled everywhere. She gathered all of the necessary information for writing the books, even though she didn't know why she was gathering the information at the time. She was fluent in Sanskrit, in the sacerdotal language of the initiates. She was an initiate directly to the masters. So when you look at the human being who comes into the world as the agent from that lodge, they cannot really have a successor because no one else has been prepared for that position. So the position of the agent or the messenger from that lodge is unique. It cannot be passed on to any other because none other is equipped as the original to carry on with the work. Whoever comes forward is through their own effort and continuous undeviating loyalty to the writings that eventually once one understands it and can start teaching it. But until such time, the main purpose of this philosophy that was brought into the world in the 19th century was that each human soul understand the reality lying behind a spirit, soul, mind entity, and that each human soul had that same ability to learn, to assimilate, to promulgate, and through loyalty to the teachings, finally reach the Master's Lodge. This was the aim why this philosophy was brought into the world, to give humanity an opportunity for perfectibility. Without this, what purpose this philosophy serves? Each human soul has that same potentiality in the spirit and soul nature. So successorship then was not understood at that time, and people hoisted themselves onto the student body all over the world through these claimants who were not real. So we need to understand that, and we need to pay attention to it, because even today claimants come forward. We need to learn the philosophy. We need to apply it to our daily lives. We need to see for ourselves the reality and the truth behind it, so that psychic nature, our psychic nature, doesn't have the upper hand. The spiritual and psychic is not the same. So, during the life of HPB, dissensions started by those who did not agree either by her philosophy or policy. After her departure, even though Mr. Judge showed the nature of the mission, the nature of the teacher. People did not pay any attention to it. Well, in like manner, once Mr. Judge departed, Mr. Crosby gave out such statements in respect to Mr. Judge that it should have really preserved the unity of all the student body of the Theosophists. Vanity, ambition, desire to pose before the world as the successor of the messenger after they are passing from the scene, hoisted these claimants onto the bewildered students who did not quite know in which direction to go. And as we said, it was split. The Theosophical Society split, so the energy that the united front had lost its power. Had it remained as a unit with a body of students all over the world united in aim, purpose, and teaching, it would have had a greater power to disseminate the philosophy. But as it turned out, it fractured. And when Mr. Crosby asked why, he would say, it all lies in one word: personalities. Personalities and successorship. If the students in all those years could not see the nature of HPB and William Kwan Judge as shown by their works and wisdom, could not test claims and personal psychological experiences by the principles of the philosophy they profess to study, how could anything or anyone undeceive them? So that it is highly significant for its truly occult value in this connection to state that the only published writing to which he ever affixed his signature was written by Mr. Crosby at the time of Mr. Judge's death, as it was mentioned before. Why did he do this? Why did he sign it? He was trying to point out the real nature of William Kwan Judge and to show the way to any students who might in truth be seeking to find the path. So, in like manner then, what Mr. Crosby stated in that letter applies with the same fidelity to himself. Like them, his works and wisdom is very apparent to those who study what he wrote. So in occultism then, merit and merit alone counts. So through the many years from 96 to 906 and then further on, he remained faithful and true without variableness or shadow of turning to masters, their message, and their messengers. He always said to stick to the messengers and the message. Ingratitude is not one of their vices. Go on with the work. We're working in the present for the future. Unless the nature of HPB and William Kwan Judge is grasped, Theosophy is not understood and cannot be understood. What about today? Should we just leave this statement in the past? Is it not applicable to today also what Mr. Crosby wrote then? When he brought the declaration forward, it was mainly taken from Mr. Judge's works. And in it also states that the aim, purpose, and teaching is what constitutes the unity among all of the students all over the world today. Unfortunately for the students of today, we're a mixed lot. Everyone did not stay with the mainline philosophy, and there are all those students who come to Theosophy without realization that there is a real textbook or philosophical book that HPB wrote, and another one with 40,000 changes in it. So they're introduced to those books. Of course, karma brings us where we need to be, but if those books did not exist, then these students would not have been exposed to something that is not real, because it isn't. So then, how should we keep this unity today? It is very relevant because we are scattered all over the world, and sincere and honest and reliable students are everywhere. So then, this devotion in unity of thought, will, and feeling to the aim purpose of that teaching, dissemination of fundamental principles of the philosophy of Theosophy, is left in charge of those students who are doing the work today. And when we look around, the message always is the same, regardless of when it is brought out or by whom it is brought out. It might be clothed in different verbology depending as to where it is given, to what nation and to what culture. But the message is always the same. It comes from the same root. And in the secret doctrine, we are told that this is Zan or Dian, however we want to pronounce it. Today then, there is an effort to change the philosophy to suit the needs of the younger generation of students. What we need to do is change the style of dissemination, not the philosophy itself. We have at our disposal what the original messenger and those who stayed faithful to the philosophy, Judge Damodar Vanabankar RC, did not have at their disposal. Today, there is a different system of communication. We can contact one another through Skype, through email, through computers. We can communicate and have conferences together even if we are not in the same place, because RC always advised that the students of Theosophy ought to visit. They need to keep in touch with one another. So all these are possible to the sincere students of Theosophy to whom Mr. Crosby left this charge. It is important to understand that the work is in the hands of the people who are in it today. So he wrote the notes on the Bhagavad Gita in 1934. A collection of the Friendly Philosopher was presented. Answers to Questions on the Ocean of Theosophy, 1937. Magazine Theosophy is everywhere, and we still benefit from it. So his burdens during many years were enormous, Mr. Crosby's. In addition to his work, he was a frequent speaker at the meetings of the United Lodge. He was constantly at the service of the hundreds of students who sought his wise and benign counsels in their many problems. He attended personally, under no matter what pressures upon his time and energies, to an incessant stream of correspondence from unknown inquirers who came in some unknown ways to learn of him and to seek his kindly advice and suggestion. He never denied his help, but gave freely without a stint or limit. Worn out in these unselfish labors for the benefit and advantage of his fellow men, burdened with the toll of advancing years, the frail body could no more sustain the increasing demands upon it. He died as he had lived, calm and serene, with no word of complaint during the days of intense suffering that preceded his release. Something of his firm principles and the impersonality of his life and work can be gained from the last article he published, the title of which is Theosophy a Progressive System of Religion? Mr. Crosby left a large amount of matter in the hands of his immediate associates in the work. And he always said, "Do not grieve over failures and partial successes. It is the effort that counts. He who, with a right motive and with sincere goodwill, does the best that he can, and all that he knows how to do, does enough." So then, in this 21st century, we need to understand what these great human beings did for us and show gratitude for their work. Spopita, saith the ancient immemorial scripture, means he is gone to his own place, but he has not disappeared. He is still with the work, and we can definitely find that channel of communication through his works. These beings, as stated by the first speaker, are always on the scene, unseen, but they are there because they become channels of influence. They're not personalities. They're those who embody principles. They're establishments, truly, and that never goes away. So we can definitely access it through our loyalty to the work at hand, and respect and love and understanding of these beings who came before us. The third reading comes from Mr. Crosby's writings. In the work which we have undertaken together, it matters not whether we fail or succeed. Our purpose has been and will be that work shall go on. We can throw, each one of us, our best into the effort. The rest is in other and stronger hands. It is then to the teachings that attention has to be called, not to ourselves, who are only handing them on as best we can. If one sees that in many ways he is not able to do all that needs to be done, or that he would like to accomplish, it is evidence that he is in the way of improving. Our ideals are never reached. They continually precede us. As the man thinks, so he becomes. Time is an element in this, and it is shortened by patient doing of what we can. To be in the least cast down by our apparent imperfections is a form of impatience, a disregard of law. One of the greatest helps that Theosophy gives is the power to take a wider survey of the field of action than is otherwise possible. We do not look on this life only, but on many future lives, during which I and thou and all the princes of the earth will live and strive for the universal redemption of mankind, ever looking ahead, ever seeing further heights towards which the awakening spirit may be directed. There is much strength. There are many faculties among men, and mostly used without direction of a permanent nature. Could right philosophy be implanted, even the single idea of the divine nature in man, a greater impetus would be given to right living. Then a philosophy in accord with this nature would be sought by those so quickened. Theosophy pure and simple is the standard by which efforts may be applied and errors combated. So it must always be kept in evidence as the source of all right effort.